So hopefully you're in the right room. This is breaking up with your Excel and moving in with Tableau the Intel way. I am Carrie McConnell. I am, in fact, a data analyst. And today we're going to talk about who I am. That'll be short. Don't worry about it. Why you should break up with Excel. How to improve communication with people who think they want to use Excel. How to build trust with people who love Excel. And then how to live happily ever after, because I think that's what we all want. This is not me. This is a cat. It's adorable. Please be distracted. My background is that I originally thought I was going to study computers, because that's what my parents do. Then I realized that humans were equally as interesting as computers, so I studied both for a while. I was a graduate student. I studied how people's eyes move while they read, and then did some cognitive modeling of what that means in the brain for comprehension. Then I went and worked for a custom software shop doing delivery software. Then I worked at an education nonprofit, and then in state government doing education policy. And then I went to Intel, and now I do all kinds of stuff. So if you have a question, it's entirely possible that I have opinions about that question. I don't promise that they are correct, however. Okay, so about Excel. So I do want to start by saying I think Excel is good for a lot of things. I don't think that Excel is meant to be a tool for sharing metrics and doing collaborative data exploration. I also think Excel is not designed to answer certain kinds of questions, which is why you end up writing crazy Excel macros that then nobody knows how to edit a couple years later. So don't think I hate Excel. Don't ask me, but hey, I do this one thing in Excel and it does it better than Tableau. What about that? Because there probably are things like that, although I will admit that the last time I opened Excel, I thought, I don't remember how to do anything in here anymore. So it is possible to stop using it. So I have several examples we're going to go through, but I want to start with sort of a high level. This is what I'm talking about. So we have, as I'm sure all of your companies do, a database of employees and all of their associated information, right? So you've got employee numbers, names, payroll information, where they sit, who they work for, how long they've been there, all that kind of information. Now this information gets used for a whole bunch of things, right? So it gets used for sort of typical HR stuff, but it also gets used for things like lease decisions, building capacity, parity in pay, right? Like there's so many questions you can ask of this data, right? Unfortunately, because most of this data is so sensitive and so specific to HR, people who want to ask questions who are outside of HR, right? So for example, I'm a space planner and I'm trying to figure out, do I need to schedule and ask for money for renovations in a particular building because a business group has just added 12 new employees in Oregon, right? I'm not going to get access to those people's pay grade. And I probably shouldn't. But what I am going to get is a giant Excel extract of the data that I do have access to, right? And unfortunately what that means, if I'm a space planner, is now the burden of analysis and cleaning the data and figuring out what I need is on me. And that's not necessarily my job. My job is not data. My job is actually to go out and play in space, right? Maybe a different kind of data. So what this leads to, at least what I've found, I'm going to use my hands, sorry. What I've found that this leads to is that each individual person has their own particular ways that they get to their end result, right? So no two people's Excel files are going to look the same at the end of this question asking process as they did, even though they started the same. And then what this leads to is stale reports, right? Because no one knows how to update a report or when it was updated or what it's exactly based on. And it leads to things where people end up with different numbers. And a VP will come to, say, our team, the data analytics team, and say, why am I hearing from, the group in Arizona that they are at, 98% capacity and I need to add buildings, and yet I'm seeing on this dashboard from you guys that they're only at 72% capacity and they can add another 200 employees before we need to do something, right? And the answer is because we calculated it differently, but this now is hours and days and chasing down people who may not even be in a particular job anymore to figure out why their Excel spreadsheet says something different, right? So what I'm trying to talk about in the context of Excel and Tableau really is how do you centralize this idea of coming up with metrics and analyzing stuff and doing it in a way that then is sort of auditable, or you can do an easy forensic analysis on, it's easy to share, it's easy to explain, and everybody goes to the same place, right? Okay, so improving communication. So this, I'm going to go through a much bigger example, and I'm actually going to show some Tableau. So we have a maintenance database that has a whole bunch of information in it, but one of the things it has in it is sort of technician scheduling, right? So you have a bunch of scheduled work on different assets, and you have a bunch of people assigned to that work, and the way it comes out of the system it's in is not designed to help people see what work is coming up, what work has already been scheduled, and what the technician's workload looks like. So there was a report in Excel. You can see a beautiful screenshot here. This is technician availability. So what it has is the number of hours people are scheduled for, and then the percent of their total hours that hours results in. And the percents and the total hours are next to each other. It makes it super easy to read. And as you can see, you can totally find the technician that you're looking for. There's no problems here. So it was hard to read. This group came to us and they said, hey, we've seen this cool new Tableau thing that you guys have going. What can you do, right? And actually what they came to us for was not, in fact, to improve their graphics. They thought their graphics were great. What they actually came to us for was this has to be manually refreshed in Excel because of the way the reporting server that it pulls from works. And they wanted to know if there was a way they didn't have to keep pressing the button every hour. So we said, yes, no problem. We can totally fix that. So some of the stuff that we found as we went through and tried to work with this team and figure out what they were even calculating, right? This database has 70 tables, many of whom have hundreds of columns, and they have a lot of overlapping columns as far as name, but not content, right? So going in there and trying to figure out what they were even doing to get this information was a process. And what we found was that people really don't like sharing what they're doing with their data, right? So we had a lot of people tell us, oh, no, just build your report on top of the Excel file, and you just need to automate the refreshing of the Excel file. You don't need to worry about the data, right? Which we were sort of like, no thank you. But I mean, I get where people are coming from, right? I think there's a lot of fear. And I think some of it's what they talked about in the keynote yesterday, where people are sort of, they've been burned before, right? But I think some of it too is, I think a lot of times the people building these Excel files know that they're not experts, or they know they don't have the support that they need, or they know they were still learning when they created them, right? And I think we've all probably been there, at least I have, unless you were born an expert. And it can be hard then to sort of expose something that you have created and that you maybe aren't 100%, this is the best thing ever, to someone who's coming in and saying, I can make it better, I'm the expert, I know what's going on, right? So what I have found, whoops, that's not what I have found helpful as I've talked to people is to just admit that up front, right? I think it's totally fine to go in and say, I can't build on top of your Excel file, right? Or I don't understand what you're doing in your Excel file, right? I think it's totally legit to say to someone, I see that you have 35 hidden tabs, and it's going to take me days to figure out which ones you're actually using that VLOOKUP on, right? Or why you have this constant all by itself on a tab that, as far as I can tell, never gets used. I think it's fine to say, I don't get where this came from, right? Like, can you walk me through how you built this, or how you use this, or if this broke, what would you do with it, right? And to sit with people. And I will be the first one to admit that I'm not a people person, so I don't necessarily like having meetings or sitting with people, but sometimes I think that's the only way to make people feel comfortable, right? And I think that the other half of that, right, is as people sort of expose things to you that aren't done correctly or are done in some crazy roundabout superstitious way that you're like, oh, you stumbled across a solution and decided to always use it and never go with anything else. You have to not make the face that says, what were you thinking? I also think passing back knowledge helps too, right? So in this particular Excel spreadsheet, there was a giant SQL query in the back where, in fact, this report had been written for a single site, so just for Oregon. And so in the Excel query, there was a where clause, and part of it was location, just Oregon. Well, they decided that they wanted to use it in Arizona as well. And instead of just adding Arizona to the where clause, they had written a brand new query for Arizona, and then they had unioned them. They had done this 6 or 7 times for different sites, which was part of why the report ran so slowly. It explained some weird stuff that popped up in there when stuff switched sites. But, you know, they actually, the person who had built it kind of appreciated when I was sort of like, oh, you don't actually need, 7 pages of SQL. You really only need a single query, and you can say site in, and then you can have a whole list of sites, right? And they had no idea that that was possible, right? Which I don't blame them. SQL's not their job, right? But I think doing that, walking through that with them and giving them back that knowledge, let them then be more sort of open with me when I asked questions about the database and about why they were calculating things the way they were. So this is my horse that you can lead to water, and apparently not make drink, but he'll do it on his own. I think the other reason people don't want to break out of Excel is that they want to control the message, right? So, for example, with this report, one of the things that does not go into this database is training hours for technicians, right? So what they didn't want to expose was a bunch of technicians who were going to look like they were only working 3 or 4 hours out of an 8-hour shift, because that's how long they were doing maintenance. But they have to do training, or they can't keep doing maintenance, right? They have to keep their training up to date, otherwise they're not allowed to do maintenance. So I also think part of their fear was that they had built in all of this stuff in this Excel spreadsheet, all these assumptions about how many hours per week a technician might be doing training, and this was making the schedules look more full than the database would suggest. It's not a lie, right? I don't think people are trying to not do work, but it's actually not in that data, right? And the nice thing about finding this out was, yes, I can help you control that message, right? I don't want someone to think a technician is free when the technician has to do mandatory training. But I also can tell you where the training data sits, right? So I also now can get the training data in there, and we can talk about what the actual schedule is for a technician, right? Which is something that they didn't have access to, this particular group. I also think people don't want something they can't change, right? And I think a lot of that, at least in my group, came from IT's history. So, the IT group that worked with my business unit had a history of taking a lot of time to change reports, right? So you go in and you say, okay, we're no longer calculating business capacity, by an assumption of 100 square feet per employee. Instead, we're going to go ahead and do it with 80 square feet per employee. We need you to change that metric in the cube, right, so that it shows up in all the reports. And that is a long process, apparently, fraught with errors. So then, as we tried to work with people, they would resist, and I think part of why they would resist is, if I have to change something for the business, which happens literally every day, I can't wait a quarter for you guys to make this change in the dashboard. It's so much faster for me to spend 10 minutes in Excel, and then I can put up a crappy bar chart in my PowerPoint presentation. So I also think one of the big benefits to us of Tableau actually really helps building this relationship, which is you can make changes almost instantaneously for a lot of these things, right? So whether or not it's how you want to sort of sustain these changes in production, it is very easy in Tableau to build a calculation on top of another calculation, or swap a calculation in and out of a dashboard, or, in some cases, change color schemes 3 times a day, right? And so I think walking into sort of I almost think of them like sales pitches, but like walking into something with a group who has admitted maybe you could help them, and starting with some of this, right? Like showing them how easy it is to build something, or how quickly you can change it, or telling them they can get a trial of Tableau and they can work on it themselves, or create a template, or you'll sit with them and create a template, really helps convince them that Excel is not faster, Excel is not easier, Excel is not the only thing they can control. And if they start to believe that they don't need to grip Excel so tightly, I think they will also start to trust you as someone who has brought them another option that in a lot of ways is better. All right, so let's go look at an example report, because I'm not going to show you real maintenance data, sorry. So it looks a lot like an Excel file. So this was the first version, essentially, of this dashboard that they asked for in order to see upcoming work, right? So it has a bunch of stuff where you can see just certain days, right? So just stuff scheduled today. You can see just stuff for certain employees. A lot of the site level stuff is row level out of the database, so somebody who visits it only sees the sites that they care about. You can go in and select all kinds of different filters, and in order to calm their fears about Excel-style sorting, I actually built in the ability to do Excel-style sorting rather than the default Tableau sorting, and then train them on how to use that. And they were super thrilled because no one had to push a button every day. I was not super satisfied, so I kept asking them questions, and ignore my colors because they're terrible, but they're bright at least. I went in and made some changes. They now have the ability to search, especially descriptions for work orders, because they hide all kinds of information in their descriptions. It's a free text field, which is great, but you can search it. And I've added different things to the sorts. They also now, instead of, hey, you've got this great thing that you're projecting on the wall during your morning pass-down meetings, but you still have to have another tab open to get into the software itself, we now have the ability, this won't work, but you have the ability to click on any work order in the original one, and it will take you to a page that will let you edit an order. This is going to take you to images of cute kittens, because that's what I wanted. So let's go back into Tableau. So I definitely kept it to Excel-like, right? And I've sort of slowly added functionality that they couldn't have done in Excel, right? The ability to click and go edit, the ability to do sort of smart searches and smart sorts. The sorts now incorporate their business rules, right? So for some dates, they will actually want to sort, like ascending or descending. For some dates, they really want sort of most current, and then things that are in the future, and then things that are in the past, right? So there's some calculations in there. They have different categories of work orders, right? So ones that are, say, regulatory have to be done, and so they want to see those first, right? Because if you're overloaded on schedule, you're going to put those in and drop other stuff, right? So there's a whole bunch of business rules that they've sort of eventually shared with us about how they use this, and we're trying to sort of build those things into it to make it easy for them. What I will tell you is, obviously I haven't done a perfect job with them, because I recently learned that rather than ask me for another sort option that they were using in one location, they've started writing their descriptions in such a way that the existing sort will sort them the way that they want, which then put them out of alignment with the standards for descriptions, so it's like a whole thing. To which I was sort of thrilled, because I was like, apparently I'm super intimidating, and I've never been intimidating in my life, so this is amazing. All right, and then I will just quickly, so the new technician sort of work order view, so this view, the sort of general view, gives all work orders, right? And depending on who someone is, this can be huge, right? So someone who only manages a small team or site, it's going to be a relatively short list. There are people who manage multiple sites or oversee multiple sites, and they're going to have a ginormous list of stuff. To see just technicians, there is now a view that sort of looks a bit like a I don't know, I guess a bit like a Gantt chart. But it's essentially by technician. They have a look-ahead window that they can set, and it shows them by technician how many hours are currently scheduled by different categories. And then this gray line on here is the total scheduled hours, which can be pulled from the database per technician. These people all work 8 hours, but it basically can show you sort of at a glance, right, how much of capacity is taken up and by which categories of workers. And then, as all good things in Tableau do, anything you click on then, of course, filters the bottom table so you can see details. And in the original, although I didn't implement it here, any of these you click on, you get that launch thing again so that they can go edit these, right? So the beauty of that is they can go in and they can say, whoa, Gary, what's going on, man? And they can see, oh, it's this super long work order, what's going on? Probably somebody put in the wrong estimated hours, right? And then they can go launch it. Yeah, so that is that example. Let's get back into here. Yeah, so at this point, data is live, which is all they actually asked us to solve. But we've also started to sort of build in stuff. I also will say, as we figured out what their business process was in one site, and then would sort of implement parts of that into the dashboard, then other sites would be like, oh, that's how they look at that? That's how they calculate that? And actually, they've started to standardize their business process like across the world for technicians based on the fact that they now all can go to the same place and see things the same way, right? I mean, there's still lots of filters and sorts. They look at different things, and they've all, I can see them because they've saved their settings and they send themselves email. But at least now they're all sort of starting from the same point, which is nice. They actually started a user group based on this dashboard that now meets twice a week to talk about it. I'm not included in those meetings, though. So, all right. Does anybody have any questions about that before I move on to the next thing, just in case? Go ahead.
The link that you put in,
yeah.
Does it link directly to that particular work order?
Yes, the system that we're using allows sort of URL parameters, and so the URL action adds the work order ID to the end of the URL, and so when it launches, it takes you just to that edit page in the software. Yeah. Anyone else? No? Okay. All right, so another big example, but slightly different result. Obviously we have lots of financial data. We have a whole bunch of projects always going on. They come in different flavors, right? You've got construction, office stuff, maintenance, all kinds of things. And obviously these projects need to request money, spend money, get the project done, right? And the big question always is, how many things are we doing? How much money is that? And how far along are they, right? And there was a bit of a concern that people were asking for money and then never spending it, which, what? So there was actually a report that showed burn up of commits for different categories of projects. Lots of people didn't know it existed. And in fact, it often was out of date, I think because people didn't look at it, so they didn't realize it was out of date. And the ETL is extremely complicated. So as we worked through this project, one of the things we learned was that people trust Excel because they're the ones writing the queries and writing the calculations, right? So especially with financial data, as we started to pull data and calculate metrics and create graphs, part of the issue was that project owners would come and be like, no, I looked at this. That's not how much money I've spent. I've spent way more money than that. I'm 100% committed on this project, right? And sort of we would have to go back and say, well, that's great, but according to finance, you're only 75% committed, and I can show you where that line item is, and just because you have a PO doesn't mean that you're going to show up in SAP, right? And so I think this brings up a whole bunch of questions about business process, which I consider out of my scope. But I think part of what we needed to work through was that, A, you're wasting people's time, in a sense, right? I mean, it's their own concern that brings them to you. But if they don't trust you and they're spending all this time double checking you, you're not only eating up your own time trying to build something, but you're eating up their time, right? And you really have to worry at that point that they're not going to consider your thing a success, even if it's better, right? Because they're going to feel like they had to spend all this time double checking it, and all this time helping you, and all this time doing it, and so what value did you bring to it, right? I also think people are worried you won't support them past the initial implementation, right? And I think this is because they've been burned before, but if I don't trust your calculations, and then you don't answer my questions, right, then I'm not going to use your dashboard. I'm going to go back to figuring out how to pull it into Excel and create something myself and double check all of your assumptions. So I think part of this is being patient with people, right, because they are going to come to you and they're going to question you. I also think one thing that my colleague who worked on this particular project found was she has created an entire tab on her sort of Tableau dashboard set that what it does is walks through all of the assumptions and some of the calculations and some of the examples so that if people go to a dashboard and they say, I think I'm 90% committed, it says I'm 75% committed on a project, if they go to that tab, one of the things that we'll talk about is the delay in data being posted to the cube, right? Or the delay in finance processing a particular transaction, right? Like it walks through all the things that presumably people should know, but it sort of helps comfort them, right? And it always is there, and you can always add information to it. And if assumptions change, you can make changes to that tab, and then everybody knows they can go there and see them, right? I think the other thing that we found is that people trust Excel because they know other people are familiar with it, right? So if I go in and I do a calculation, or if I go in and I pull a bunch of information, if I pass it to someone in Excel, I know that they then can get what they need out of it, right? Because I know that people are familiar with Excel. If I go to a dashboard and I pull down a bunch of filters and maybe I do some parameters, I can save it and I can email it to someone, but can I trust that whoever I send it to can read what I've done, right? That they can tell what filters are set or parameters have been used, or that they're even going to know how to use Tableau, right? I think my assumption when I first started using Tableau was that in fact Tableau dashboards are super easy to navigate because you just click around and stuff happens, right? A lot of people are not clickers, apparently. There are a lot of people who, when confronted with a new web page, which is essentially what a dashboard is, they sit back, right? They sort of lean back in their chair and they survey it as if it is an alien landscape, and they start saying things like, walk me through this, right? And you're like, well, it's a bar chart. I mean, that's a bit of an extreme example, but like, I think there are people who like to try things and like to break them, right? And I think a lot of us are those kind of people. It's part of how we ended up where we are. And I think there are people who are more comfortable waiting until they know more or have been given more information before they go in and start using something. And I think that can mean that people feel like Tableau is not an intuitive tool for them. Now, I will say once they start using it, then they find it very intuitive and they like it a lot, but there's that like initial reaction that I think you need to sort of, part of what I really liked about the keynote yesterday was I think he talked about this, right? And this is something we've tried to do, which is if you're working with someone on a dashboard that they're going to have to present to their boss or to the VP, right? You need to give it to them in a way that then they feel like they're presenting it, right? And part of that makes them learn it better, and they will ask you better questions. But part of that also is that gets them over that sort of like, will anyone else use this? Because then they can answer questions, right? It's not just that they have to send, their boss back to you. Well, I don't really know how this works, but this team made it, right? Instead, they can say, oh, yeah, you go here, you do this, you can look at the calculations here, or we had a meeting with so-and-so to sign off on this, right? Like, get them sort of bought in to the process. Yeah, it's a cute dog. So once again, let's go look at an example of this dashboard because I've just talked about it. Instead of a bunch of lines in Excel that people had to hover over to figure out which categories they were, you now have, these are fake, but Let's assume these are different categories of money. You now, by category of money, can see a quick burn-up chart that gives you sort of, on the right, you've got age of projects, and on the left, you've got sort of weeks of money being spent. The biggest one is allocated, right? The next one is commits, and then the smallest one always will be spends because it lags behind. So you can see how are we doing, and it looks like we got a slow start there at the beginning on spending money, but we're doing okay now. Then it has sort of a breakdown by organization. So you've got sort of overall, how are we doing spending money, and then by major business unit, how are we doing at spending money, and how many projects do we have in flight, right? And how big are those projects, right? So obviously this TD Ops people are doing a lot of work. I will tell you that while these are real names of business units, these are not real dollar amounts. And then we have sort of this commits evaluation, which tells you things like how many projects do I have that are far under committed, given how far along they should be, and how much money is that. And in the original, you can click on these to then get line item detail. And there's a project manager view that gives you this, but instead of as an overview like the original, it gives you sort of your area and how you're doing. And people use this to sort of report up on how they're doing on projects, but then a little bit, I think, lately on using it just to manage projects. It's a little bit easier to read this than some of the line item detail out of SAP. So, all right. Any questions on that one? I'm going to sum up and then do some weird stuff. So for people who, so for this one specifically, there is a view which is designed for project managers, and it has a much more grid-like layout so that it has specific numbers. This particular view gets used as an overview, and we've worked really hard on trying to train the VP in charge of our department. We've worked really hard on trying to train him on, do you really need 3 decimal points, right? And this is something that I ask people when they come to me and ask me to build stuff a lot, is what decision hinges on the hundredths place, right? And in some cases, there are, right? And in that case, I will build something that has a lot more numbers and is not as visual. But in a lot of cases, the decision has nothing to do with the numbers, right? The decision here has nothing to do with, how many 0.2 millions I've actually spent. The decision here is actually about how far behind am I lagging on spends versus allocated, because I'm going to get in trouble with finance if I'm not spending my money, right? And they're going to start doing takebacks, right? So I think that the answer that I would give to your question is, sometimes when that's necessary, you can't use the big visual analysis, right? However, there are a lot of times when I don't think that the numbers are actually necessary. And I think people get fixated on looking at numbers when what they really need to do is make decisions, right? And I think one way I've tried to work around that is to sit with people when they're doing stuff, right? So if you watch someone walk through, well, I filter this by this, and then I color it by that, a lot of times that's the time to ask the question of, oh, so you're just coloring on above and below, or you're just coloring on these 3 categories, right? And then you can ask questions like, okay, well, if something's in this category, do you then go back and look at the value? Or is it just, oh, geez, everything is red. I need to do something about it. And I think that's work, right? Like, you have to slowly convince people of that. We started out having to put numbers with decimal places on everything, right? Every chart had to have numbers everywhere. And then we started moving them into tooltips and teaching people about tooltips and how great they were. And then we started doing filtering actions to other tabs, right? If you really need the detail, go to another tab. And then we've there now are ones that really, there are no, there's hover numbers, right? Like you can see 2.0 million, but doesn't really tell you, the number's not important. Does that help at all? Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. Then I will go back to my PowerPoint. Okay. So conclusion, right? So I would say that my big approach with people is to take them back to the beginning, right? So if somebody comes to me and they say, you know, I need a dashboard with some dials across the top that are going to tell me how I'm doing on my projects, and then underneath that I'm going to need some pie charts, maybe a 3D column chart. I usually try to stop them and say, that sounds great, but what decisions are we making? Who's looking at this? What data is this pulling from? You know, how are you using it now? Do you have a template that you're running from? Is it a PowerPoint? Is it an Excel file? Is it an MSBI graph, right? And then sort of figure out, you know, the best middle ground between what they're used to and what I, and I say this not with ego, but with just experience, I, as sort of the expert, think will help them make decisions, right? And I think sometimes that means doing things that aren't my favorite the first time, because I have to figure out which battle to fight, right? If I'm going to do a hard no on pie charts, I may have to settle for red and green. But then to sort of slowly evolve what people see, right? So I know this can be a trap, but I don't necessarily like to do a project and then be like, this is done, this is your dashboard, unless it breaks, just run with it. I do sort of like to always be open to, tell me if you want changes, right? Tell me if something's not working, talk to me about your process. Are there other groups who use something similar, right? Is there another data source you want to pull in and see them together? And I think that gives you the chance to slowly evolve people from something that they're very familiar with to what it is they actually need to use. And I think as long as you are always there for people, and as long as the changes you make don't ruin their stuff, then that builds up a huge amount of trust, and the next time they come to you, you won't have to start as far back from what you want to do, right? You'll be able to suggest sort of bigger things. I also will say there are projects where this doesn't happen, right? You know, I had a project recently that was very frustrating, in part because I kept trying to suggest things that I thought would help them make decisions, and they were just very, very insistent that what they wanted to see was grids of numbers or heat maps or things that I didn't think actually answered their questions. They're super happy with the result of that project, which is great. I'm not, but I sort of have faith that if they're really doing what they say they're doing, that in 6 months they will realize it doesn't actually answer their questions and that they're still doing a bunch of forensic analysis, and they will hopefully come back to us because they're super happy with us, and let me do some of the stuff I already wanted to do. So I have a folder where I've saved all that stuff. And then finally, what I've found is that if you really make a good dashboard, it will change people's behavior, right? So that's part of how I know I've been successful in a lot of cases, is that instead of just, okay, good, we're going to keep using this the same way we used our giant Excel macro, is that people will start to sort of have a user group or have discussions about business process or realize there are gaps in their business process that they were holding together with sort of human glue in a hidden tab, and now that's sort of exposed, right? You know, maybe nobody knows who actually owns a particular building scope, right? In which case, that needs to be figured out. It was being hidden because, you know, nobody was looking at that building when they were filtering. Now it's out there and there's no one to assign it to, clearly, right? Or there's a building that belongs to 2 people, right? And I think, to me, that's how I know I'm successful, is that people start to realize, they sort of take the data outside of just, I look at data, to, oh, this is just part of how I run my projects. This is how I part of run my job. This is how I think about things. All right. So, okay. There are already complaints? No. Go ahead. So the question, I don't know if everybody could hear it, was about time, right? So people will come to you and they want an Excel-like dashboard and they want it fast. And how do you deal with that, balancing that with wanting to give them something different? So I've definitely come across that. Everybody always wants everything immediately. I have found one way to deal with that is definitely to give people an Excel dashboard. But I usually will make excuses about what Tableau can and cannot do, or what the server can and cannot do. They may or may not be true. And I'll be like, you had 24 columns, and unfortunately I can only fit 10 on your monitor screen, right? So I'm going to help you sort of collapse some of them down. So some of those steps can be done more quickly, right? So like coming up with better metrics, or teasing out some of the business process. And then you can always, and I guess it depends on your level of engagement with the person who's asked, but if you have some amount of relationship, I think one thing that you can always do is, if they need it quickly, a lot of times they need it, I find, for a presentation. And I think you can follow up with them to ask how the presentation went, and if while they were doing it there was anything that frustrated them, or if they still had to make charts for their PowerPoint and what those were. And then you can sort of be like, oh, so I put something together that might address some of those for the next time you have to do this presentation. And I keep it separate, but maybe on a different tab in the same dashboard. And then see if people like it. So like you're sort of tricking them into continuous engagement with you, but you're doing it in a way that makes them feel like you just really want them to do a good job. Yep. Yes. Yes. So I find that that's a big concern, right? And I think that is a huge change management sort of topic. So, I mean, I would give you my sort of opinion, but I think some of that comes from above, right? Some of that comes from management and how they talk. And I can't change that, right? But I do find that a lot of times emphasizing what people are going to do with it can help sort of allay their fears, right? So I like to emphasize that my scope is maybe sourcing the data, cleaning the data, putting it in a format they can look at or present, depending on what they're doing with it, or a format they can explore, right? So most of the dashboards I've presented are things that are sort of done in a way. But certainly we have made some stuff that's for people to go in and mess around, right? And I think sort of emphasizing where your scope ends and where theirs begins, right? Like, and really they're the ones who are sort of interpreting, presenting, persuading. If it sets off some other business process, they're the ones managing that, right? I think emphasizing that you're just trying to minimize the amount of time they end up swearing at Microsoft, and sort of maximize their time to actually do what their expertise is, that can help. I don't think that's a quick process, and I don't think that's necessarily a one project process. I also think that sometimes means creating a dashboard that has a download for Excel, and walking them through, like, here's the dashboard, this is what we're gonna put up for everyone to see. But if you need to double check it, or you have one-off reports you need to do, right, you can always download the source and work on it. I try to usually close the loop by saying, and if you create something that's really cool, let us know, because we can put it up and put your name on it, right? And nobody's taken us up on that yet, but I think for us that's my sort of next evolution, right, is to try and have more people outside of our team at least creating proof of concept in Tableau, right? Because right now a lot of people create their proof of concept in Excel, and then that limits like how they look at it. And I think trying to get people to create proof of concept in Tableau will help sort of expand their mind, I guess. But yeah, that's sort of how I've looked at it. Anybody else? Yep. So we haven't had a ton of that. Intel's made it difficult to print stuff, I think, so people don't necessarily do that. But we've had a couple times when people want that. And I have a colleague who gave a talk earlier in the week with my boss who does a lot of survey stuff. And a lot of the survey results people have wanted in a printed out sort of format. And so she has several dashboards that she sort of designed with PDFs in mind instead of with the computer screen in mind. So you can look at it on our sort of website, and you can see it, but she designed it in such a way so that if you export it as a PDF, it prints out really nicely, and we've sent those to people so that they can print it out. That means cutting out a lot of your interactivity, obviously. But one thing that we've walked some of those people through is, right, you maybe have a section at the top that you don't print, right? So you tell it not to print the first page of the PDF. That has sort of more of the like filters and parameters and stuff so that people can sort of set up a bunch of stuff and then know it will print out nicely. We sort of treat Tableau like an app a lot. We don't necessarily always treat it like a dashboard builder. Any other questions for now? Okay. I want to talk about something that looks nothing like Excel. First, I should have done this earlier, I forgot. One of the things that we've done that actually has really helped is we came up with sort of visualization standards for our team right up front so that all of our dashboards look similar. It's, I guess, the same idea as the whole certified thing we're going to be doing, but sort of did it manually. This is not mine. I stole this graphic, and I did attribute it to the person it's from, but don't think it's mine. For our team, we just essentially put up a story. Sorry, this is VPN over Wi-Fi. Makes it slow. But essentially, we put up a story for everyone on our team and for anybody who's not on our team who publishes. And it walks through things like what makes a good visualization and what types of graphs might answer different types of questions. And then we have a bunch of color schemes, right? So some of them are based on our branding, and some of them are based on things like we don't do red-green, right? We do either blue-red or shades of yellow, or we have a green-blue palette, right? And they're based on things like, is your continuous value really good, bad, or is it just magnitude? Or is there a center, and then you want to see how far off you are from center? And we also have little tags that we put onto all of our dashboards, and I put fake ones onto my fake dashboards here. But you can see up in the upper right, I don't know if you can really see it. Is there a way to zoom in? Probably. I don't know. Maybe I could just make it huge. And make it 48? Whoa, it's probably too big. But we put little text tags on all of our dashboards. We try to make them so that if you take a screenshot, you have to have that in there, because we had somebody cut them out. But they say created by, and then the name of either our team or the team of the person publishing it. This obviously is not my team name. It should be. We always put on there the last time the dashboard itself was edited, so that people know, did we not work on this in this quarter, or have we been updating it every day? We put in what data sources it pulls from, so that people know the source. If there's a refresh schedule, usually that's noted on here. And then we have to, for our own internal standards, we have to put what security level the dashboard is, right? So it'll say something like Intel super secret. And that's a way that people can go in and they know, oh, when I'm looking at this web page, it's a web page created by your team, right? Let's see if it loaded. But also sort of having the consistent color schemes, I will say, also has made a difference, right? Our stuff just looks the same as itself and not necessarily the same as anybody else's stuff. This just may not work, unfortunately. I can share this file with people if they email me or tweet at me. There's nothing secret in here, our standards document. But, oh, yay. But essentially we found that sort of having sort of rules, people can be very creative within those rules. I mean, the two dashboards that you saw from me look radically different. They were built by different people. But at least having the sort of same color scheme, approximate dashboard layout, similar choices, it gives it a look and feel. It also helps with that sort of initial, like, oh no, what do I do? Because people go in and if they've seen another one, they sort of know what to do, right? I mean, I think Tableau lets you build user interaction in a lot of different ways. And we've sort of centered on a couple, right? We almost always have click to filter, always, right? We almost always start with a giant summary of some kind at the top. And then there is some sort of click to filter on either that tab or the next tab, right? And people just get used to that. They just start clicking on things when they want to drill down, right? We almost always put location as a filter at the top. Like we have all these sort of consistent choices, and that's helped as well. Okay, but what I really wanted to talk about was not that. What I really want to talk about was something I built in Tableau that looks nothing like Excel. So we at Intel have an internal recognition program, so employees can send each other money. It's awesome. Sometimes I get money just for answering email. So we have this program, but the reports that you get, you can only see your own stuff, what you've sent and received, and you essentially get it as an Excel download. It's not super helpful. And it's something that people wanted to be able to see for our yearly review process, right? Because wouldn't it be cool to go into your boss and be like, well, look at all these nice things people said about me. So we took that on to build something in Tableau to show people what was up. So this knows it's me. Aha, Carrie McConnell. This is real data. I'm super popular. So I'm not at all. But essentially, what it's showing you here is there's all of these categories that people can say that their recognitions are in, right? You're super good at risk-taking or discipline or results orientation, right? And they're actually on our, they're on our badges, right? They explain the different values. And so you get a count. How many recognitions have you received thus far that fall into different categories? So we also created this sort of gamification of recognition, where we essentially said, if you get a certain number of a certain kind of badge, a certain kind of recognition, you get a badge. If you send and receive to someone, you get a badge, right? All of the things you're probably familiar with through other gamification stuff. I wish this wasn't so slow. Oh well, I took screenshots, so we can just pretend. So as you click on the little things on the right, it's a menu, and it will take you, there's a page where you get to see all your badges, and it looks like a little book. And when you click on the arrows, it takes you through, it flips the pages, and it shows you all of your badges. Along the bottom, you can see the results for everybody, not just you, right? Who has what and how many points and different things. There's a game board. Mine's full because I'm the one who designed this, but as you get badges, it sort of steps you along through the world, and you can hover over things to see how many more points do I need to get to the next level. You have little redeem points. This does not work, right? We didn't build in any actual, like, go somewhere to redeem points. Instead, you have to talk to your manager, and I think since I'm at the summit, I feel like I should get a day off. Is that how this works? But it's got sort of different suggestions, and I know that different teams are doing different things with this. And then you actually can go in, and it looks like a little book, but it just gives you the full text of any of your recommendations, right? So this is the one that I could take to my review with Sarah. I just pull this up, and I can page through and be like, look at the things people said. And then as we've started sort of building into all of our stuff, there's a frequently asked questions tab, which is, there's no viz, it's literally just text. So that people can say, you know, like, why isn't my stuff showing up? Why don't I have enough badges? And all of that. So, yeah. That was something to me that because we didn't start with a dashboard, right? Nobody came to us and said, make it look like this. We were able to sort of make it look like, to me at least, it looks like you're in an application, right? It doesn't even necessarily look like you're in Tableau. And to me that was kind of fun because we actually got to build something visual from the bottom up instead of trying to go in and build a bunch of metrics that someone had already decided on. But that's it. That's all I've got. And I think we're out of time, so perfect. So thank you guys all very much for coming. If you want to come up and get one of my sweet business cards, they have a quote on the back. They're pretty cool. And feel free to email me or tweet me to ask me for files or questions. All of the data I showed is fake, so that I can give you stuff. Also, you should fill out your survey, but only if you want to give me a good score. They didn't tell me I couldn't say that, so. But anyway, thank you.